President, on May the 5th of this year, NASA launched the InSight rocket. That probe, the InSight probe, has traveled 300 million miles since May of this year and touched down safely on Mars. It's a remarkable achievement. The United States is the only country in the world that has any probes on Mars, and we have several now, both moving around and stable. The technology behind that, the thought, the design, the engineering, the work is a remarkable achievement for the science community. 300+ million miles that it's traveled since May is a remarkable achievement, and to be able to land safely. Now, I compared that 300 million mile journey of the InSight probe and safely landing on Mars to our now 2-decade-long conversation trying to solve immigration. We as Americans have figured out how to travel 300 million miles, but we've not been able to figure out how to be able to manage our own immigration policy. This is the 10th time I've come to this floor to talk about immigration in just the last 3 years. Earlier this year in February, we had a tremendous amount of work that was happening here in the Senate to try to come to a set of agreements about how we can manage immigration policy in the United States. And those agreements failed. And while InSight was traveling 300 million miles, the Senate still did nothing to be able to resolve the issue of immigration. And we watched today several thousand people in Tijuana living in a soccer stadium after they left out from Honduras, traveled into Guatemala, the Guatemalans deporting several thousand of them and saying you didn't cross legally from Honduras into Guatemala. And then they approached the border between Guatemala and Mexico put their law enforcement and their military on the border and said you can't just cross the border illegally from Guatemala into Mexico. And then they charged the bridge, overran the law enforcement and the military of the Mexican police, went around into the river, and then regrouped again and continued to move forward through Mexico, to which Mexico offered them asylum, which I thought that was incredibly gracious based on the way that they crossed into Mexico, offered them asylum and the ability to be able to stay in Mexico, offered them assistance all the way along the way, and did arrest some troublemakers along the way. And now they made their way all the way through Mexico, and they're just outside San Diego. And a few days ago, the same group rushed our border to be able to see if our border would cave the same way the southern border of Mexico did. Yet we did not. Interestingly enough, that group of several thousand people that rushed the border and that are now parked on that border are literally living within a few hundred yards of the largest legal border crossing in the world, the San Diego crossing. 100,000 people a day legally cross the border from Mexico into the United States within feet of where they charged the border and demanded to get entry into the United States. Now, let me just set that for you again side by side. 100,000 people every single day legally cross the border from Mexico into the United States at the Tijuana-San Diego crossing. Yet the attention is not on the 100,000 legally crossing the border. The cameras are turned towards a few thousand that are trying to rush the border illegally. Our perspective is out of whack. We're not a closed country to immigration. We're an open country to immigration. 1.1 million people last year became citizens of the United States. 1.1 million. But we're a nation that has order and structure. We have 1 million people every single day that leave the United States coming in legally, either through Canada or through Mexico or based on flights. Our law enforcement folks that handle all the issues there with Border Patrol, with Customs, and all the different folks from ICE, they do a tremendous job every single day. I think Secretary Nielsen and her leadership has been stellar leadership to be able to help manage through PR nightmare that has been created because the cameras want to focus in on a few people crossing illegally and refuse to turn the camera just 15 degrees and focus on 100,000 people coming across the border legally. We do have to do something about our immigration policy. We are a nation that has been open to immigrants our entire history as a nation. And we remain so and should remain so. But the question seems to get spun up on this one issue. What do we do about someone who intentionally breaks the law to come into our country? How do we treat them versus the person who has gone through the process who is legally coming into the country? Are they to be treated the same, whether you illegally cross the border at San Diego as someone who legally crossed the border at San Diego, or do we treat them differently? Last year, there were 400,000 people that were arrested illegally crossing our southern border. 400,000. Now, again, that may seem like an incredibly large number, but let me put it back in perspective. 500,000 people, that'd be 500,000 people, legally cross our border on the south every day. So we had 400,000 people arrested crossing our southern border illegally, 400,000, but yet over the total of an entire year, 400,000 people arrested, but every single day, 500,000 people legally cross our entire southern border. As I mentioned, 100,000 of those just at San Diego. We as Americans need to make decisions about how we're going to handle immigration. And I think we've got to get some numbers and some perspective in place, because all the attention seems to be distracting us from the actual facts and numbers. So let me run through some things. There's been a lot of conversation about family units, about what does it mean for family units to be able to come in, and should family units be separated? And let me make it very clear. I've been very outspoken to say family units need to stay together whenever possible. We're Americans. We're very passionate about families. If a family unit crosses the border illegally, as much as possible, we need to keep that family unit together. That may mean we need to have them in a spot, in a detention unit, or some place where they can actually stay together as a family as much as possible. But for whatever reason, the courts have not allowed us to be able to go through that system. I think that's something that this Congress needs to respond to and needs to be able to step up to, but this Congress has been unwilling to be able to do the votes that it takes to be able to make sure family units actually stay together, because the drama of tearing families apart looks so much better on TV. But what's been the result of that? What's been the result is a massive increase in the number of children that are coming to our border. Now, this may sound familiar to you, and it should. In 2014, under the time of President Obama, when he announced the DACA proposal, that was deferred action for childhood arrivals, President Obama looked at those individuals that were living in the country here, that had been here for a long time, that came as children. Now, their parents broke the law by crossing the border, but they were a child. In American law, we do not punish children for the actions of their parents. We don't do that. So President Obama looked at these kids and said, you've grown up in our country, your parents violated the law, but you did not. We're going to give you deferred action. We're going to give you the opportunity to be able to have an ability to be able to work and to be able to be here. It wasn't citizenship, but it was an opportunity to be able to stay and work. Well, as soon as that was announced, within months, the American border started being flooded with unaccompanied minors, with kids coming in, 17 years old and younger, that would cross the border. They showed up in the thousands. They were brought by human smugglers from Central America who make their living moving people from Central America to the United States. And that business started traveling all through Central America saying, President Obama is going to allow you to be able to stay in the country. He's just announced this program, and if you'll go now with me, you'll get to stay in America. And so parents were literally surrendering their teenagers, most of them boys, and saying to their boys, go to America, go find a job and work and send money back, and would send their kids with human smugglers. Now, President Obama was saying, time out, that's not what I said. President Obama was very clear to say you had to have been here years ago. You are not eligible. If you cross the border now, do not come. Our State Department actively worked to get the message out in Central America. Do not come. You will not be able to stay. But the human smugglers were telling them, they're just kidding. I'm going to take you and we'll show you that we can get in. And what happened is they started bringing kids by the thousands up to the border. When they got there, they would introduce them to border folks. They would go in and they would get an opportunity to be able to stay, a piece of paper that said you can't be deported while they go through their paperwork. Those kids then were taking a picture of that piece of paper, saying, I got in, I'm legal, snapping it, sending it back on social media to their friends in Central America, and it just accelerated. And it blew up into huge numbers. In my state, in Oklahoma, President Obama used one of the military bases there in Lawton, Oklahoma, converted one of the dorms, and removing unaccompanied minors into this military base around a big giant fence in the middle of the base, as he used other military bases to be able to house unaccompanied minors because they were coming in such large numbers that couldn't be managed. That was under President Obama's time. And it took a long time, several years, to be able to get the message back out to Central America, stop sending your unaccompanied minors because it's not just an automatic entry. Then the conversation started about family units, saying if you come as a family unit, you're going to be able to get in. Now, that's not what everybody was saying here, but that's what the smugglers said back in Central America. Hey, the Americans allow you to come in if you come in as a family unit, so bring a child with you and you can get in. And we've watched over the last year the number of adults showing up with a child on our southern border dramatically increased by the tens of thousands. An unintended consequence. It's interesting, some may have noted over the weekend a Washington Post story that was titled, "For Central Americans, Children Open a Path to the U.S. and Bring a Discount." The Washington Post story was a story that they're doing research in Central America, these human smugglers, what they're doing now in their business. And they detailed the story that it will cost $10,000 if you travel as an adult. But if you bring a child with you, you and the child can come for $4,500. So it's half price if you bring a kid. And families are so desperate in that area to get some kind of assistance, literally adult males mostly, are going to families and say, let me take your child with me, I'll get a discount, and then I'll send you some cash back, and I'll try to enroll this child in an American school or find somebody to be able to take care of them. And we have individuals showing up at our southern border now that are bringing a child they're not related to because they get a discount on their human smuggling time, and they get more expedited process to be able to actually get across the border to request asylum, though they're not actually requesting asylum, they're just getting across the border and then trying to be able to find a job. It's economics. Do we not see what's happening? We are encouraging the human trafficking of children from Central America from unrelated adults to come. It has a nickname in Central America now that the Washington Post story highlighted. It's called adoptions. That's the new nickname, that I'm going to take my child and adopt them out to some unrelated adult, and so they can get into America cheaper and faster, and hopefully things turn out for that kid as well. Our broken immigration system is encouraging this, and we need to address it. Over the last 2 years, Congress has appropriated about $1.7 billion to build 124 miles of new or replacement fencing along the border. This funding is not some tall concrete tapeworm running along the southern border. It's a fence. Now, in 2006, it wasn't controversial for the Secure Fences Act. The Secure Fences Act built 650 miles of wall fence along the southern border. That fence was very effective. For instance, earlier this year, Congress provided funding to replace 14 miles of fencing along the border between San Diego and Tijuana, Mexico. For the last 20 years, the border along San Diego and between Tijuana and San Diego has been actually old metal sheets from the Vietnam era that were used in Vietnam to lay out on the jungle floor to be able to land helicopters on. They took that old sheet metal decades ago when they brought it back, and then they used it as the fencing between San Diego and Tijuana. That fencing is being replaced. Congress provided the funding, and DHS has done 18-foot high bollard-style fencing, open fencing that you can see through, not the solid sheet metal that's up there. And though the actual final results haven't been released on it yet, the border agents on the ground have said they used to have 10 illegal crossings a day through that old-style fencing. Now they have 1 illegal crossing a month through that new fencing. And for all of the whining and all of the conversation that I hear is if you build a fence, there's just a ladder, it's dropped from 10 a day to 1 a month just when the fencing changed. And it allows our agents to be able to see a danger or risk on the other side and to be able to respond to it. By the end of the next fiscal year, DHS will have completed about 120 miles of new fencing, California, Nevada, Texas. They'll also install 100 different video towers because it's not about fencing, it's also about technology and the ability to be able to see what's happening in the border because we don't need fencing in every area of the 2,000-mile border. Just since early January 2017 to now, DHS has put up 31 different fixed surveillance tower units along the southern border. They've done 74 different remote video surveillance systems along our southern border, 7 command and control facilities on the southern border. They put up a tunnel threat program. They've done what's called a linear ground detection system and a fiber optic detection system across our southern border in many areas to detect the tunnels that are being dug, to be able to move illegal narcotics mostly in those tunnels rather than people. They put up mobile surveillance systems. This is not just about fencing, it's also about technology, and DHS has done both, and it is making a difference. But while the cameras are focused on children coughing with tear gas at our southern border, we need to ask ourselves a question. What are we doing in the policy here that's encouraging people to bring children to the border thinking they're going to get faster access if they can illegally cross? Why is this happening? How do we stop it with our policy? This nation should continue to be open. We should continue to receive immigrants from around the world, including from Central America and from Mexico. I have neighbors and friends all through my community that are from Central America and from Mexico. They're welcome citizens of our country. That's a part of the fabric of who we are, people from all over the world. But I have a very difficult time saying that 100,000 people at the San Diego crossing that are crossing legally should be ignored every single day for the sake of a few thousand that want to crash the fence, that crash the barriers in southern Mexico and that are working to crash the barriers here. We need to have a more reasoned response to this. Listen, if you've never been to a naturalization service, you ought to go. I have a staff member that I completely agree with who says, I can't ever get to a naturalization service I don't cry at. So far, I've been 0 for 0. I've never been to a naturalization service I don't cry at during the service. They're exceptionally moving events. To watch a large group of people from all backgrounds, from all languages, stand and raise their right hand and pledge allegiance to a brand new country, to set aside their old path and to realize for many of them this was years in the process to legally go through all the right checks and to be able to get to that point. And for those 1.1 million people that do that every year, we honor those individuals and welcome them openly. Let's honor people that are doing it the right way. Let's fix broken areas of the system that are encouraging people to bring children because they get a discount if they travel with children illegally across our border. Let's find a way to be able to work out work visas. Let's deal with issues like temporary protected status that needs to be resolved. Let's deal with the issues of our immigration, but let's not continue to stall. If the Mars InSight probe can travel 300 million miles in 5 months, surely this Congress can sit down and resolve the immigration issue in a few months. I look forward to that in the next Congress in the days ahead. to finally getting this resolved. With that, I yield the floor.